If you are listening to this on Mother's Day, then I need you to stay with me until the end, because this story does not begin with a broken card or a cruel sentence. It begins with a lie that lasted 12 years. A lie so complete that my whole town believed a living woman was dead. A lie that reached into my phone calls, my letters, my father, and the man I almost married. A lie built carefully and fed to me piece by piece until I believed the emptiness in my life had happened naturally. Then on Mother's Day my mother stood in front of 20 people, looked me in the eye and told me the best gift I could give her was to disappear from this family. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I walked out. And 30 seconds later a black limousine stopped in the middle of Maple Street, and the woman who stepped out of it was the dead woman my mother had buried 12 years earlier without a funeral. My name is Moira Calloway. I am 28 years old. I am an ICU nurse. I have spent most of my life learning how to stay calm when everything around me is collapsing. I thought I understood what crisis looked like. I thought I understood what family damage looked like. I was wrong. Because what happened that day did not just expose my mother. It exposed every silence that came before it. So before we get to the front porch, and the card in the trash, and the woman from the limousine saying my name like she had been carrying it across an ocean, I need to take you back. Not to 3 weeks before Mother's Day. Further. Because if you only hear what happened that Sunday, and not everything underneath it, then you will miss the part that matters most. You will miss how a person can be pushed to the edge of their own family so slowly they start believing they walked there on their own. And before we go any further, I want you to do one thing for me. If you have ever felt like the problem in your own home, while everyone else got to act innocent, then subscribe right now. Like this video so more people who need it can find it. And when you hear something in this story that sounds like your life, I want you to tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what part hit you the hardest. I read more of them than you think. Now let me take you back to the first thread I pulled. The one that should have told me something was very wrong. 3 weeks before Mother's Day I got off a 12-hour night shift in the ICU. It had been the kind of shift that makes time stop being real. The kind where the clock says one thing and your body says another. The kind where you measure the night in alarms and medication dosages, and whether a hand on a shoulder needs reassurance or warning. I had been on my feet since 7 the evening before. By the time I walked into my apartment at 7:45 in the morning, my scrubs smelled like sanitizer and coffee and that sharp hospital air that never completely leaves your skin. I dropped my bag by the door. Kicked off my shoes. Went to fill a glass of water. That was when I saw the missed calls. 4 from my mother. Sandra Calloway does not call 4 times unless she wants something or wants it known that she wants something. There is a difference, and with her the difference matters. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I needed to. I should tell you now that when my mother's name appeared on my phone, my body always reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My jaw set. My breathing changed. People like to think harm always arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a name on a screen, and your body recognizes it before you do. I called her back. She picked up immediately. No greeting. No hello. No how are you after a night shift. This year's Mother's Day will be bigger than last year's. That was her first sentence. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. She kept going. We are having people over. You need to be there. And do not show up empty-handed this time. This time. Not do not forget. Not I hope you can make it. This time. As if I had failed an exam I had not known I was taking. I asked what she wanted. She said, I do not know. Think about it. Then there was a pause. Just long enough to sharpen what came next. Look at what your sister does. Learn something. Then she hung up. That sentence stayed in my kitchen long after the call ended. Look at what your sister does. Learn something. My older sister Brittany had always known how to move through my mother's world. She knew what gifts would get displayed. What words would earn approval. How to stand just close enough to my mother to look loved without ever being swallowed by her. I do not think Brittany would describe it that way. I do not think she fully understood what she had learned. But she learned it. I learned something else. I learned how to survive being the comparison. I checked my schedule. I was supposed to work on Mother's Day. Sunday shift. Hard one to cover. Harder because everyone wants off. I spent most of the next hour texting co-workers and calling in favors until I found someone willing to switch. Not one person in my family knew I had done it. Not one person thanked me. I did not expect them to. What unsettled me more was what I noticed after the call. My father had not contacted me in over 2 months. That was not normal. Dale Calloway had habits. Not preferences. Habits. Every Sunday at 10 in the morning he called me. Usually from his office line because it was quieter there. He would ask how work was. Ask if my car was behaving. Ask if I was sleeping enough. He always asked that last part, like he knew the answer, and hoped I might lie in a comforting direction. The last time he called the line went dead in the middle of a sentence. He had been saying I was thinking maybe this summer, if your schedule lines up we could. Then silence. Not static. Not a dropped call. Not the weird hollow click you get when a cell tower fails. A clean end. I called back twice. No answer. Then nothing for 2 months. I remember standing in my kitchen, with the phone still in my hand and feeling a small shift inside me. Not fear exactly. Not yet. More like the sensation that comes when a picture frame on a wall tilts just enough for you to notice it from across the room. Something was off. I should tell you who my mother is before I tell you what happened next, because without that context her words on Mother's Day can sound like a sudden cruelty. They were not sudden. They were practiced. Sandra Calloway is 54 years old. She dresses beautifully. Keeps an immaculate house. Uses linen napkins for lunches that do not require them. She has a way of saying in our family like she is citing law. She does not raise her voice in public. She does not need to. Her cruelty is precise. Lightly delivered. Almost reasonable if you were not the one standing under it. When I was 16 I was in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening. But bad enough. I lost part of my hearing in my left ear. Spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Had headaches for months. Needed follow-up appointments. Needed someone to sit with me through the worst of it. My mother did not take a single day off work. I am not telling you that to make her monstrous. I am telling you because it happened. A year later Brittany chipped a nail 2 days before her rehearsal dinner, and my mother drove 2 hours each way to sit with her at a salon. That is the shape of our family if you need one image to hold it in your mind. My sister Brittany is 32. Married to a surgeon named Kevin Pierce. Beautiful in a way that attracts assumptions. Polished. Controlled. She can make a room feel smaller without saying a thing. When she looks at me there has always been something in her expression I struggled to name. Not hatred. Not exactly contempt. Something gentler and worse. A sort of resigned superiority. Like she had already accepted a version of my life in which I never quite arrived. For a long time I thought this was simple favoritism. I know now it was not simple at all. There was design underneath it. I just did not know the pattern yet. The first time I should have truly understood that something was wrong happened about a year before Mother's Day. I was at my parents' house, standing in the kitchen, rinsing out my coffee mug after a short visit. My mother was in the next room on the phone. Her voice was low enough that I could only hear pieces. Then one sentence came clear through the doorway. "Ruth cannot come back. You understand that?" I stood there with the mug in my hand and water running over my fingers. Ruth was my father's younger sister. My Aunt Ruth. And according to my mother, she had died 12 years earlier in a car accident outside Paris. My mother was the one who told us. Told the neighbors. Told the family. Told anyone who asked. So who was she talking about? I remember turning off the water and listening harder, but by then she had moved away. I told myself I had heard wrong. Or misunderstood. Or maybe she had been talking about someone else. That is one of the first things people like my mother teach you. They teach you to distrust the clean line of what you heard. They teach you to place doubt between yourself and your own perception. And once that habit is built, they do not have to work nearly as hard. What I did understand very clearly was why I kept returning to that house. It was never for my mother. It was for my father. Dale Calloway is 57. He retired early because of a heart condition that slowly reduced his world one permission at a time. No more driving. No more ladders. No more fixing engines in the garage with the radio on. He used to be the kind of man who could repair almost anything. Wiring plumbing, lawn mowers, half the street's bad ideas. He was most comfortable with tools in his hands and grease under his fingernails. After the diagnosis he got quieter. Not bitter. Never bitter. Just reduced. He spent long stretches on the back porch with weak coffee watching the yard like it still reported to him. Every time I visited he would find an excuse to get me out there. He would pour 2 mugs and ask me small questions about my life in a way that made the smallness feel respectful. As if details mattered because I mattered. That porch was where he still felt most like himself. 2 weeks before Mother's Day I stopped by unannounced. My mother was home. I almost left. Then my father came into the kitchen, and when he saw me his whole face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough that anyone paying attention would have known he was genuinely happy. He reached for the coffee maker. We took our cups to the little table by the window because my mother was still on the phone somewhere deeper in the house. He sat down across from me. Wrapped both hands around the mug. Looked like he was building up to something. "Moira, there is something I have been needing to." Then my mother appeared in the doorway. "Dale, you forgot your afternoon medication." He looked at me. "And if you have never seen apology without language, I hope you never do. It is one of the loneliest expressions a face can make." He stood. Touched my shoulder. Said softly, "I am still here." Then he followed her out of the room. I sat there with 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table, and the strangest feeling settled over me. Not just that he had been interrupted. That he had been prevented. There is a difference. That same week I had dinner with my best friend Celeste Morgan. Celeste is 30 and works as a paralegal in Columbus. She is one of those people whose brain seems to have a separate department devoted entirely to inconsistencies. You tell her a story, and she does not just hear events. She hears timelines. Missing paperwork. Phrases people choose when they are hiding something. I met her in college when we were both lost in the rain trying to find the same building and ended up sharing an umbrella and insulting the campus map together. We have been close ever since. Over dinner I told her about my mother's call. The party. The demand to show up with something meaningful. The missing calls from my father. The interrupted conversations. The sentence about Ruth cannot come back. Celeste set her fork down. You do not have to go, she said. I know. So why are you going? Because if I do not show up, my father will sit in that house all day pretending not to care. Celeste looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked the question that mattered more. What do you think is really happening there? I remember opening my mouth and then stopping. Because until that moment I had not let myself answer honestly. I had been circling around it. Naming pieces of it. But not saying the whole shape aloud. I think my mother has been making me disappear for years, I said. I just do not know how far it goes. Celeste held my gaze. Not dramatic. Not pitying. Just steady. That was the first moment the sentence existed outside my head. That night after dinner I went home and opened my nightstand drawer. In the back, behind a spare key and an old birthday card, was a photograph I had not looked at in months. Me at 5 years old in a yellow dress with butterflies on it. My mother in the backyard on Maple Street reaching toward me and laughing. Actually laughing. Not posing. Not performing. Not arranging her face for whoever held the camera. It was the only photograph I owned where she looked unguarded. Warm. Like joy had surprised her. I stared at it for a long time. There are objects in your life that are not evidence of anything except hope. That photograph was one of mine. I held onto it because I needed proof that at least once my mother had looked at me and seen something other than inconvenience. I built her Mother's Day card around that photograph. Hand-cut paper. Cream stock. Folded edges. I took more time with it than I want to admit because the care itself was humiliating and I knew it even while I was doing it. Inside I wrote, I know we have not always understood each other, but I am still your daughter. That sentence tells you almost everything about who I was before that Sunday. Not because it was beautiful. Because it was pleading. I showed the finished card to Celeste the next day. She read it twice. Then she said, you are either very brave or very foolish. I said maybe both. Then because some part of me knew more than I was admitting, I asked if she would come with me on Mother's Day. Just in case I need a witness, I said. I tried to say it lightly. She did not smile. I will come, she said. The day before the party Brittany called. Are you coming tomorrow? She said it like a reminder about an appointment neither of us wanted but both accepted. Yes. Dress nicely, she said. Mom invited the Hendersons and Patty Oakes. It is not casual. I asked how Dad was doing. There was a small pause. He is fine, she said. Then she hung up. That pause bothered me. It bothered me because it sounded rehearsed. Too short to be natural. Too careful to be nothing. And it brought back something else I had seen 6 months earlier. Something I had tucked away because I did not know what to do with it. I had been at my parents' house and noticed a white envelope on the hallway table. It was worn around the edges like it had come a long way. The return address was handwritten. A Hargrove. Edinburgh, Scotland. Hargrove was Ruth's married name. My dead aunt's name. I picked up the envelope. It was addressed to my father. Before I could even turn it over, my mother appeared from the kitchen and took it from my hand without breaking stride. That is your father's mail, she said. It does not concern you. I remember the exact way she said it. Not flustered. Not caught. Calm. Clean. Final. People only sound that controlled when they have anticipated the possibility. That night before Mother's Day, I was lying in bed scrolling through old contacts in my phone. The kind of pointless late-night habit people fall into when they do not want to sleep, because sleep means tomorrow arrives faster. That is when I saw it. An old number saved from when I was 15. Aunt Ruth landline Paris. I had not deleted it because deleting it would have felt too final back when I believed she was dead. Then years passed and the number just stayed there like digital dust. I stared at it with my thumb hovering over the call button. I could have pressed it. I did not. That matters to me now because sometimes I think about how close the truth was. One call away maybe. One impossible ring. One human voice where there should have been none. But that is the problem with living inside a manipulated reality. Even your instincts begin asking permission. So I put the phone down and tried to sleep. Mother's Day morning I arrived at my parents' house at 10. The party was not supposed to start until noon. I came early on purpose. I wanted time with my father before the house filled, and my mother converted the day into theatre. The tulips along the front path were in bloom. Deep red and yellow. My father planted them every year because he believed in things that returned. He was on the back porch when I got there. In his usual chair. Mug in hand. Looking out over the yard. When he turned and saw me, something in his face softened so quickly it hurt to watch. "You came early," he said. "I wanted to see you before it got loud." He nodded like that answer meant more than I had said. Beside his chair was a small carafe with enough coffee for two. He had expected me. That detail still undoes me. We sat in the cool bright air. The porch boards creaked softly when we shifted. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. My father kept turning his mug between his hands. Once. Twice. 3 times. He always did that when he was building toward a hard sentence. Then he looked at me and said, "Moira, there is something I need to tell you. I should have said it a long time ago." And I. The screen door opened. "Dale." My mother's voice floated out in that pleasant tone she used when she wanted her interference to sound harmless. "I need you inside for a minute. The good tablecloth is stuck in the top cabinet." My father looked at me. Again that apology. Again that helplessness. Again a conversation beginning to exist and then being shut down before it could become real. He touched my shoulder on the way past. I sat alone on the porch with 2 cups of coffee and a feeling so sharp it almost had shape. Something important was trapped in that house. And whatever it was, my mother knew exactly where it lived. By noon the house was full. The Hendersons arrived first. Gary and Linda from 3 doors down. The kind of neighbors who attend every event because they believe attendance itself is a moral virtue. Then Patty Oakes with a foil-covered dish and her good earrings. A few cousins. A couple of family friends. People from church. People from the neighborhood. By 12:15 there were close to 20 people moving between the kitchen and living room. My mother was in a blue dress she reserved for occasions she considered worth managing. Brittany arrived with Kevin in a black SUV I did not recognize. New. Glossy. Too expensive for our street. Brittany carried a wrapped gift box with gold ribbon. Kevin came in behind her already looking at his phone. Celeste arrived a few minutes later. Cream blouse. Hair pulled back. Alert eyes. She found me by the window and took in the room with one sweep. "Why does this feel staged?" she murmured. "Because it is," I said. I wish I could tell you I understood then how staged it really was. I did not. I only knew I felt like I had entered a play halfway through and no one had given me my lines. My mother moved through the room like she had choreographed every angle. Laughing at the right moments. Touching arms lightly. Mentioning Brittany's redecorated living room twice before anyone asked. Accepting compliments with modesty so precise it became its own form of bragging. She did not mention me once. Patty Oakes caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod. At the time I could not tell if it meant hello or sympathy or simply recognition. Later I would replay that nod and wonder how much she already suspected. The room kept swelling with chatter until my mother tapped her spoon against a water glass. Not hard. Just enough. Everyone settled. I think she said with a smile, it is time for gifts. The back of my neck went cold. Brittany stood almost immediately like she had been waiting for a cue. Which of course she had. She carried the gold ribboned box to my mother and set it on the coffee table with both hands. My mother made a little sound of anticipation. Inside the box was a necklace. Diamond pendant. Heart-shaped. White gold. Expensive in a way that does not ask to be admired because it already expects to be. The room reacted exactly as it had been taught to react. Linda Henderson leaned forward. Patty Oakes touched her chest. My cousin smiled. Someone said beautiful. Someone else said Brittany always knows. My mother held the necklace up to the window. Brittany fastened it around her neck. Then my mother turned to the room and said my daughter knows exactly what her mother likes. Not looking at Brittany alone. Looking at all of us. That is how hierarchy gets reinforced in polite families. Not through shouting. Through public naming. Through selective warmth. Applause. Light. Genuine. Just enough. And then my mother looked at me. Not casually. Directly. And Moira, she said. What did you bring? 20 heads turned. I stepped forward holding the card with both hands. I remember every detail of those few seconds. The way the paper felt slightly soft where my palm had warmed it. The way Celeste shifted beside the wall. The way my father's jaw tightened though he said nothing. My mother took the card. Opened it without ceremony. Looked at the photograph. Read the line I had written. Looked at the photograph again. For 2 seconds I let myself imagine something impossible. That she would stop. That she would recognize it. That some buried human part of her would see the image of herself laughing in the backyard with the daughter she now barely tolerated, and something would crack open. Instead she turned and dropped the card into the trash beside the end table. Like a tissue. Like junk mail. Like something already used. There was no hesitation. That is the part that stayed with me. Not anger. Not performance. Efficiency. The room went silent. Truly silent. Not social silence. Not the soft gap after a joke fails. The kind of silence that makes people aware they are in the wrong version of reality, and do not yet know how to return to the familiar one. I stood there with my hand still half extended. My mother straightened. Then she looked at me with that cool evaluating expression she usually saved for objects in the wrong place. The best gift you could give me, she said, would be to disappear from this family. Calm. Unhurried. Measured. Like she had practiced it. Nobody moved. Linda Henderson looked at Gary. Gary looked down. Patty Oakes stared into her coffee like there might be another answer at the bottom of it. Brittany froze. Kevin lowered his phone. Celeste stood up. I looked at the trash can. The bent edge of the photograph was visible beneath a folded napkin. That was the only proof I had ever carried that my mother had once looked happy beside me. And now it was in the trash at her feet while 20 people watched. Go, she said, before you ruin the mood. I do not know what expression was on my face in that moment. I know only what it felt like. Not shock exactly. Shock is loud. This was quieter. It was the feeling of something finally matching itself. The outer vent aligning with an inner truth I had been refusing for years. I said okay. Just that. Then I turned and walked to the front door. No tears. No scene. No defense. The strangest thing about humiliation in public is how clean your movements can become. Your body knows one thing. Exit. I stepped into the sunlight. Maple Street looked unchanged. That is what felt so surreal. A lawn mower somewhere 2 blocks over. Wind moving a neighbor's chimes. Tulips nodding along the path. Bright May light on trimmed hedges. The world had not adjusted itself to match what had just happened in my chest. I started walking. Not fast. Not slow. Behind me I heard the front door open. My mother's voice carried out. The party is not over. Then Celeste's voice. Calm. Flat. I think it is for me. A second later footsteps approached and matched my pace. She did not ask if I was okay. She was too smart for that. We were halfway down the block when we heard a car. At first I barely registered it. Then it slowed. Then I saw it. A black limousine on Maple Street. Long, glossy. Completely absurd against a row of familiar houses and porch flags and children's bikes in driveways. It rolled to a stop directly in front of me. Not near me. In front of me. The rear door opened. A woman stepped out. Silver hair cut short. Navy blazer. Green stone necklace catching the light. Reading glasses pushed up over her forehead. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent years being very sure of herself and did not need to announce it. She looked at me. Then she said my name. Moira. I froze. Because voices live in the body longer than faces do. And somewhere deep beneath 12 years of absence, and one manufactured death, and every story my mother had told me about impossible distance, I knew that voice. Aunt Ruth. For one suspended second the street seemed to go soundless. Then she crossed the space between us and put her arms around me. I did not move at first. Then I held on. Not carefully. Not politely. I held on the way people do when something impossible has suddenly become solid. Behind us there was movement at the house. I turned just enough to see my mother on the porch. And I will remember her face for the rest of my life. Not guilt first. Not fear first. Recognition. Then color draining so fast it looked like something physical leaving her body. Her knees gave out. Gary Henderson lunged forward and caught her arm before she hit the step. Linda was beside him immediately. My mother sank down onto the porch and stared. She did not say Ruth's name. She did not speak at all. Aunt Ruth looked past me toward the house. Her voice when she spoke was calm enough to be devastating. Does she know, she said, that your father has called me every week for the last 12 years? I turned so sharply it made my neck ache. Every week. 12 years. My mouth opened but nothing came out. Celeste made a sound beside me. Small. Sharp. The sound a person makes when a puzzle piece does not fit because it belongs to a much larger picture. Ruth opened the limousine door and looked at both of us. Come inside, she said. Not as an order. As a threshold. We got into the back seat. The door closed. The world narrowed. Outside the neighborhood stayed visible through the tinted glass. People on the porch. Shapes in the doorway. Familiar houses arranged along the street like ordinary life had not just split open. Inside the car, Ruth folded her hands in her lap and began speaking with the kind of clarity that only comes from carrying the truth too long. I was never in an accident, she said. I have been living in Edinburgh for 12 years. I have a home there. A practice. Clients. Friends. Alive. I am not dead. I have never been dead. No one said anything. In 2013 your father and I were speaking regularly, she continued. He was worried. I was worried. I told him I believed Sandra was isolating him and reshaping the family around her preferences. I specifically told him I was worried about you. She looked at me directly. 2 weeks after that conversation your mother informed the entire family and most of Maple Street that I had died in a car crash outside Paris. I could hear my own heartbeat. Nobody checked, she said. Why would they? People do not verify a death announced by family. They grieve. They adjust. They stop saying the name. My father, I said. He knew. He knew the announcement was false almost immediately, Ruth said. Because I called him. We created a system after that. He could not safely receive calls at the house, so he called me from his office landline. From payphones. Once from a neighbor's house. Every week when he could manage it. Every week. The sentence kept crashing through me. Then why did he not tell me? Ruth took off her glasses and held them loosely in one hand. Because he was trying to. 4 years. And because every method he had was narrowed or interrupted or rerouted by the same person who just told you to disappear. Celeste finally spoke. What exactly was being rerouted? Ruth turned to her, as if she had expected that question and approved of it. Letters first, she said. Calls where possible. Information. Opportunities for contact. Your mother set up a post office box without Dale's knowledge and redirected mail intended for him. At least the mail from Moira. Dale only realized pieces of this over time, because the pattern did not look obvious from the inside. My letters. College birthdays, holidays, apology notes. I had written to him so many times during periods when he felt distant, and I thought maybe he was withdrawing because of his illness, or because families drift, or because people get tired. He did not get those. Most of them, no, Ruth said. I pressed my fingers into the leather seat. And the calls. Your father tried. But home phones can be monitored. Cell phones can be checked. Timing becomes difficult when the person you live with treats privacy like theft. I thought that was the worst of it. Then Ruth said the name that made the air in the car vanish. Josh? My head snapped up. What about Josh? For 2 years I had believed Josh Coleman, and I ended because he simply decided I was too much work and not enough future. That is the version I had accepted because it was painful, but ordinary, and ordinary pain is often easier to carry than designed pain. Ruth watched me carefully before answering. Your mother met with him before the breakup. My mouth went dry. No? Yes? How do you know? Because Dale told me. Josh stopped by his office afterward. Briefly. Upset. Confused. He said Sandra had told him there were medical things he did not understand about you. That your hearing loss was more severe than he knew. That caring for you long term would be more complicated than he was prepared for. She framed it as concern. As honesty. As protecting him from being blindsided. I stared at her. I could not seem to blink. Josh did not ask me about any of that, I said finally. No, Ruth said. He did what uncertain people often do when fear is handed to them by someone who sounds authoritative. He withdrew. There are moments when anger arrives hot and immediate. This was not one of those. This anger came in cold. It settled. It organized. I looked down at my own hands and thought about all the nights I had spent revising myself to explain Josh. Maybe I had been too distant because of work. Too difficult to reach. Too withdrawn after the accident. Not warm enough. Not open enough. Not desirable enough. I had built a whole private language of self-blame around a breakup that had been tampered with from outside before I even knew I was defending myself. Celeste asked the next question before I could. Why now? Why show up now? Because Dale asked me to, Ruth said. Last month he managed a longer call than usual. He said Moira was still trying. Still showing up. Still being pushed to the edge. He said if there was ever a moment to end this, it had to be before Sandra succeeded in making Moira believe she had nobody left. I covered my mouth with my hand. Still trying. That was how my father described me. Not difficult. Not dramatic. Not disloyal. Still trying. Ruth let the silence settle for several seconds. Then she asked the question that changed everything. What do you want to do? I looked out through the tinted window toward my parents' house. Shapes moved behind the curtains. Someone had helped my mother inside. The party was no longer a party. It was a room full of people waiting for reality to choose one version of itself. My father was still in that house. That thought arrived larger than every other thought. Not my letters. Not Josh. Not even Ruth alive in front of me. My father was still in there with the woman who had built all of this. I want to go back, I said. Ruth gave one short nod. Then I will walk in with you. Celeste looked at me and adjusted the cuff of her blouse like she was preparing for court. I will remain near the door, she said. In case anyone later develops memory problems. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Instead, I reached for the handle. And before I tell you what happened when we walked back into that house, I want to pause here, because this is the part where a lot of people ask the wrong question. They ask, why did you not know sooner? Why did you keep going back? Why did you keep trying? But if you have ever grown up in a house where one person controls the emotional weather, then you already know the answer. You do not look for the full pattern because your whole life has taught you to survive individual storms. You do not assume conspiracy. You assume you are sensitive. Misremembering. Overreacting. Never quite enough. If that sounds familiar, then stop for a second and tell me in the comments what the first lie was in your family that you were taught to treat as normal. And if you are still here this far into the story, then subscribe now, because the next part is where everything that was hidden gets dragged into daylight, and not everyone in that room survives it the same way. We got out of the limousine and walked back up Maple Street together. I was in front. Ruth half a step behind me. Celeste peeling off near the porch rail, where she could see and hear everything without becoming part of the scene. Brittany was standing in the doorway. One hand on the frame. Shoulders too rigid. Face carefully arranged into concern. Moira, she said. Mom is not feeling well. You should probably. I kept walking. Then she saw Ruth. People talk about faces going white. It is real. It happened. Brittany stepped back without finishing the sentence. We entered the living room. The air inside the house had changed. Rooms remember humiliation. They remember fear. You could feel it in the stillness. People stood in little clusters pretending not to be staring. My father was in the corner chair by the lamp. Kevin sat on the couch looking fully present for the first time all day. Patty Oakes stood near the fireplace with her arms crossed. Linda Henderson was by the window. Gary near the bookshelf. And my mother was on the sofa holding a glass of water in both hands. She looked up. Ruth walked past everyone and stopped in front of my father. For a second he just stared. Then he stood so abruptly his chair legs scraped the floor. Ruth, he said. Only her name. But I have never heard grief and relief occupy the same syllable before or since. She stepped into his arms and my father leaned against his younger sister and cried without making a sound. Nobody in the room moved. My mother sat very still on the sofa. If you have ever watched a person realize control has left the room, you know the look I mean. It is not panic first. It is calculation. Which explanation is still available? Which performance might still hold? When Ruth stepped back, my mother found her voice. Ruth, I had no idea. We were told there had been an accident. I thought you were. Sandra, Ruth said quietly. Dale called me every week for 12 years. My mother's fingers tightened around the water glass. That is not possible, she said. Ruth tilted her head slightly. The office landline. The payphone on Birchwood. The Pattersons' house twice when Dale said you were visiting your sister. Would you like the dates? The room went completely still. That is the thing about precise truth. It does not shout. It corners. My mother set the water glass on the coffee table with a small click. Then she drew in a breath and tried again. This is not the time or the place. When would be better, Ruth asked. No one answered. Then from near the fireplace Patty Oakes spoke for the first time. I think now is exactly the time. Every eye in the room shifted to her. Patty had been my mother's closest friend for 20 years. Lunches. Church events. Christmas cookies. Garden tours. The kind of friendship small towns treat as permanent infrastructure. My mother looked at her as if betrayed. Patty did not look away. My father wiped his face with the back of his hand and straightened. Something about him had changed in the past 5 minutes. Or maybe something old had returned. The effect was startling either way. He looked less diminished. More tired and more present at once. He turned toward the room. I want to say something, he said. And I need to say it while people are here. Sandra, my mother began. He lifted one hand. Please let me finish. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak to her like that. Not angrily. Not loudly. But without permission in his voice. My mother stopped. He looked at me. Moira, you have called me 47 times in the last 18 months. I know because I counted every missed call on the office phone. The phone your mother did not know I kept records on. My throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. I never stopped being your father, he said. I need you to know that in front of witnesses. Linda Henderson put a hand over her mouth. Gary stared hard at the rug. My father kept going. I do not know every detail of what Ruth has shared. But I know my sister did not die 12 years ago, and that I was told she did. I know letters stopped arriving that I later learned had been sent. I know I found reasons to use a pay phone on Tuesday mornings, because the calls I made from home did not stay private. I know drift when I see it. Families drift. But they do not drift with this much accuracy. Accuracy. That word hit me harder than any other that afternoon. Because accuracy implies design. My mother was very still. Brittany looked like she was standing inside a memory she had spent years refusing to label. Kevin had both feet flat on the floor now. Phone gone. Eyes fixed on my mother. My father sat back down slowly, not because he was done, but because he wanted the next part to land without his body shaking. I have lived in this house for 31 years, he said. And for the last 12 I have lived with a lie that grew large enough to block out my daughter and my sister. I will carry my part in that. I should have fought harder sooner. But from this day on, nothing that concerns Moira or Ruth will be discussed privately if I can help it. No more quiet corrections. No more explanations after the fact. If something is to be said, it gets said in the open. He looked at me again. I am sorry it took me this long. I nodded because if I had spoken I would have broken. Ruth stepped forward then, and addressed the room. My name is Ruth Hargrove, she said. I live and work in Edinburgh, Scotland. I have clients on 3 continents. A mortgage. A passport. A very ordinary vegetable garden that does terribly in winter. I am not dead. A couple of people actually exhaled at that like they had been holding their breath for years without knowing it. 12 years ago, I expressed concern to my brother that Sandra was narrowing his world and isolating Moira. Shortly after that, Sandra announced my death to family, friends and neighbors. I am here today because Dale asked me to come, and because Moira deserved to know that not everyone who disappeared from her life left by choice. That sentence changed the air again. Because now it was not just Ruth. It was everyone. Every silence. Every missing call. Every unanswered letter. Every person I had quietly mourned while blaming myself for their absence. Paddy Oakes turned to my mother. Sandra, you need to explain this. My mother stood. She looked suddenly older. Not because time had passed in the last hour, but because control had. You do not understand what it was like, she said. I was trying to hold this family together. Ruth was filling Dale's head with poison. Moira was always difficult and Dale never saw it. Someone had to keep things stable. Difficult. There it was. The old family word for any daughter who noticed too much. Ruth's reply was immediate. That is not stability. That is management. My mother looked at Brittany, then the way people look for reinforcement when the room has stopped agreeing with them. Brittany had her arms folded across her stomach. Not defensive. Holding herself together. Mom, she said quietly. Enough? It was such a small word. Enough? But I think it may have been the first honest boundary my sister ever placed in that house. My mother looked at her like the floor had shifted beneath her. I finally spoke. I am not here to humiliate you, I said. My voice sounded strangely calm. Almost detached. Years in the ICU teach you that the clearest sentence in a crisis is usually the quietest one. But I need to be very clear about what happens next. Starting today, I will contact Dad directly. His phone. His schedule. His choice. If there's interference, then I will find out what legal options exist for protecting his communication and autonomy. Celeste did not move by the door, but I felt her presence sharpen. I do not hate you, I said. But I am done trying to earn something you have never intended to give me. My mother opened her mouth. Then closed it. For once there was no counter-narrative ready. I turned to the end table. The trash can was still there. I reached inside and lifted out the card. One corner of the photograph had bent. The rest was intact. I smoothed it with my thumb. My mother in the backyard years ago, laughing with her head tipped back. A small girl in a butterfly dress reaching for her. My father crossed the room slowly and stood beside me. I remember that day, he said. His voice was low and full of memory. You were trying to catch a real butterfly. Kept chasing the same one for 20 minutes. You wore that dress all afternoon because you thought the butterflies printed on it would attract the real ones. I looked at him. He touched the top of my head lightly. I am sorry, Moira. I did not tell him it was okay. It was not okay. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do in a family full of distortions is refuse false comfort. So I said, we will figure out the rest. He nodded. And for a second, standing there with that bent photograph between us, it felt like the first true conversation we had finished in years. The room started dissolving after that. Nobody announced the party was over. People simply began acting like witnesses instead of guests. Coats were collected from the spare room. Casserole dishes reclaimed from the kitchen. Handbags lifted from side chairs. Voices dropped to the careful volume people use after funerals and accidents, and confessions that cannot be unheard. Linda Henderson hugged my father before leaving. Gary shook his hand. The cousins offered thin, uncertain goodbyes. Kevin went outside to bring the car around. Patty Oakes stayed the longest. She stood near the door with her dish under one arm, and looked at my mother sitting in the corner chair, with her hands folded in her lap. Patty did not say anything. But that silence was louder than any accusation. Then she turned and walked out. When the last guest left, my mother rose, without a word, and went down the hallway to the bedroom. The door closed. No slam. Just a click. That sound echoed through the house more than yelling would have. Brittany sat alone at the kitchen table. Ruth and Celeste drifted to the back porch in the natural way people seek air after catastrophe. My father stayed in the living room for a minute longer. Then he said he needed to take his evening medication. The real medication on his own schedule. Not when my mother told him. And that left Brittany and me alone in the kitchen. I sat across from her. For a while neither of us spoke. Outside, Kevin's engine idled at the curb. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere in the sink a dish settled with a soft porcelain sound. Finally Brittany said, "I do not know where to start." "You do not have to start at the beginning," I said. She looked at the table instead of at me. "I knew she was not fair to you," she said. "I have known for a long time." "I know you did," I said. That made her look up. "Then why did you keep coming back?" "Because of Dad." No anger in it. Just truth. "It was always because of Dad." She swallowed. When she spoke again her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "I did not say anything because I thought if I sided with you I would lose her. And if I lost her then, I would lose the version of her that loved me. I knew it was conditional. I just did not want to test the condition. I sat with that. Because I understood it. That was the terrible thing. I understood it completely." "That is not an excuse," she said quickly. "No," I said. "But it is a reason. Those are different." She nodded once. Then after a long pause she said something that rearranged years of memory in a single sentence. "She always treated us like there could only be one winner." I leaned back in my chair. "Explain that." Brittany gave a small joyless laugh. "The gifts. The holidays. The calls. The compliments. She made everything feel like a contest whether we agreed to play or not. If I brought flowers and you brought a card, then the flowers won. If you got praise from Dad, then she would spend the next week reminding me of something I had done right. If you were struggling, she would tell me I was sensible. If I disappointed her, she would say, "At least Moira never expected much from life." I stared at her. She nodded. "She used you against me too." That hurt in a new way, because it complicated everything I had relied on. My sister had not just been favored. She had been used. Not equally. Not the same. But used. "I do not think either of us knew how to be sisters inside that structure," she said. The kitchen went quiet again. Finally she looked at me and said, "I am sorry I did not say anything sooner. I thought about all the years between us. All the separate injuries. All the ways silence had shaped us both into people who mistook adaptation for choice. Then I said, start from now." She blinked hard. Nodded. Looked down again. Outside Kevin honked lightly once to let her know he was waiting. She stood. Then paused. "Did she really talk to Josh?" she asked. "Yes." Brittany shut her eyes for a second. "I always wondered why he left so suddenly," she said. "She told Mom something about him being weak." "Weak?" That was what my mother called anyone who did not cooperate with the script. Brittany picked up her purse. Then before she left she looked at me and said, "For what it is worth, I do not think Dad ever stopped trying. I think he just forgot what trying was supposed to look like." After she left I sat there alone in the kitchen and let that sentence settle. Forgot what trying was supposed to look like. There are people who fail you because they do not care. And there are people who fail you because they have been trained into powerlessness so slowly that disobedience feels impossible. The damage reaches you either way. But the grief is different. I went out to the back porch after that. Ruth was leaning against the railing. Celeste was seated in one of the porch chairs with a legal pad on her lap, because apparently even now she was taking notes. I looked at her. "Really?" She shrugged. "Trauma makes details slippery. I prefer records." Ruth smiled for the first time that day. Then she turned to me. "I am sorry," she said. "For not pushing harder years ago. For accepting Dale's belief that he could manage it himself. For waiting this long." "You came," I said. "That is what matters." My father joined us a few minutes later carrying 4 mugs of coffee. 4. Such a simple thing, and yet it nearly broke me again. We sat there while late afternoon stretched across the yard. The tulips glowed in the lowering light. Somewhere a kid rode past on a bike. The whole street kept insisting on being ordinary, even while my life was reorganizing itself around the truth. For the first time in years my father spoke freely. Not fluently. Not perfectly. But freely. He told Ruth about the tricks he used to call her. Tuesdays from the office. Once from the pay phone near Birchwood. Once from the Pattersons when my mother was out. He told me he had found my name in the office caller ID records and started writing down dates, because it was the only proof he could preserve that I was still trying to reach him. He admitted he noticed my letters stopped, but kept telling himself maybe I had become busy or distant or tired of doing all the work. "I should have known better," he said. "Maybe," I said. "But now you do." Ruth asked when he wanted to get a cell phone. He looked confused. "A what?" She smiled. "A cell phone, Dale. For grown adults living in the present." He gave a surprised little laugh. The first real laugh I had heard from him in years. By the time I was ready to leave, the light had gone soft and gold. I had my bag over one shoulder. The card tucked safely in my jacket. Celeste was by the front door waiting without rushing me. Ruth had stepped into the dining room to take a call from Scotland. Then my mother came out of the bedroom. She had changed out of the blue dress into a cardigan. Her hair was no longer fixed. Without the armor of presentation, she looked less formidable and more exhausted. Not innocent. Not tragic. Just stripped of the polished version of herself she preferred the world to meet. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. "I am not going to apologize," she said. "Not for most of it." I waited. "I know what I did," she said. 4 words. Simple. Flat. Unprotected. I know what I did. Not I was trying my best. Not you made me feel. Not you do not understand. Just that. And of everything she said that day, those were the only words that did not feel rehearsed. I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "That is the first honest thing I can remember hearing from you in a very long time." She did not react. Maybe it landed. Maybe it did not. Some truths arrive too late to have visible impact. I picked up my bag. Hugged my father. Hugged Ruth. Touched Celeste's arm. Then I walked to the front door. Outside, Celeste unlocked her car, but did not start it right away. "You okay?" she asked. I looked back at the house once. Not at the windows. Not at the porch. At the whole shape of it. The place that had held so many unfinished conversations, and so much careful damage. Then I said something I did not expect to hear from myself. I think for the first time in a long time I actually am. She started the car. We drove down Maple Street through the late afternoon light, past the limousine, past the tulips, past everything that had happened and everything that would still happen, because one revelation never fixes a family. It only removes the excuse to keep pretending. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning at exactly 10, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Morning, my father said. He sounded awkward and pleased and faintly too loud, the way people do when they are not used to cell phones. Ruth had bought him one before flying back to Edinburgh. Simple prepaid smartphone. Set up in his name. His number. His contacts. We talked for 32 minutes. About work. About a patient who had finally gone home after a long stay. About the tulips. About whether my brakes were still squeaking. Nothing spectacular. Nothing cinematic. But near the end he said something I had been waiting years to hear in some form. That is good work, Moira. He meant the ICU. He meant my life. He meant me. And he said it with the quiet certainty of a man who had always believed it, and had only just found a path clear enough to deliver it. I visited 2 weeks later on a Tuesday. My day off. My choice. When I arrived, my mother was home. She heard me come in and went to the bedroom. No drama. No greeting. No interference. My father made 2 cups of coffee, and we sat on the back porch for an hour and 20 minutes. No one interrupted us. That silence felt holier than any apology. The fallout after Mother's Day was not explosive. Small towns do not explode. They cool. Paddy Oakes called my mother once 3 weeks later. A short call. After that her name stopped appearing on the calendar in the kitchen, where my mother wrote lunches and social events. The blank Saturdays began to multiply. The Hendersons did not invite my parents to their 4th of July cookout. They had hosted that cookout every year for over a decade. Gary texted my father separately to say he was sorry and glad Ruth was alive. My father texted back, thank you for being there. Brittany texted me 17 days after Mother's Day. I read the message and did not answer for 3 days. Then I wrote back 2 sentences. Okay. Start from here. She responded with one. Thank you. We are not close now. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But the line is open. In a family like ours, that is not a small thing. Sometimes people ask if I forgave my mother. Here is the truest answer I know. Forgiveness is private. Boundary is public. They are not the same thing, and confusing them is how a lot of damage keeps renewing itself. I do not need my mother to agree with my boundary for it to exist. I do not need her remorse to justify my distance. I do not need to hate her in order to stop offering myself for harm. That was one of the hardest lessons of my adult life. Maybe the hardest. And if you are at that part of your own story right now, where you are trying to figure out whether creating distance makes you cruel, then listen carefully. It does not. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop auditioning for a role that was never going to be given to you. I still carry the photograph in my wallet. The corner remains bent. I decided not to fix it. Because that bend is part of the truth now. It came through the trash and back into my hand, and somehow that made it more honest than if it had stayed perfect. Late at night during breaks in the ICU staff room, I sometimes take it out and look at it. My mother laughing in the backyard. Me reaching toward her in the butterfly dress. For years I treated that picture like proof I must have imagined everything else. Now I see it differently. I think it proves something simpler. That even if love existed once in some unfinished form, it was not enough to excuse what followed. A single warm memory cannot be allowed to govern a lifetime of cold reality. 6 weeks after Mother's Day my phone rang again. International number. Scotland. It was Ruth. She asked if I was all right. I was standing in my apartment holding a mug of tea looking out the window at an ordinary Tuesday evening. Cars passing. Someone walking a dog. Nothing dramatic. And for the first time in years ordinary felt like a gift. I am good, I told her. I am actually good. There was a quiet on the line. Warm. Satisfied. Your father says you talk every Sunday, she said. We do. That is all I needed to know, Ruth said. After we hung up I stayed by the window a little longer. Not thinking about revenge. Not rehearsing the confrontation again. Not imagining better lines or harsher ones. Just standing there in my apartment in a life that was gradually becoming mine again. That sounds simple. It is not simple. It is everything. Because for so long I had organized myself around a single impossible project. Becoming someone my mother could be proud of. Not someone I was proud of. Someone she was. Those are not the same project. And when I finally understood that, I think something in me unclenched for good. I went back to work the next morning. Back to the fluorescent halls. Back to alarms and charting and coffee that tastes burnt by hour 3. Back to the steady work of keeping people alive where I can and keeping myself honest where I must. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with speeches. It does not need everyone in the room to recognize it. It just keeps showing up. Shift after shift. Boundary after boundary. Truth after truth. I think I had been building that kind of strength for years without realizing it. And I think on Mother's Day, when my mother threw my card away and told me to disappear, she expected the old version of me to go with it. The one that still begged. The one that still translated cruelty into hope. The one that still believed if she found the right words, or the right gift, or the right level of patience, she could unlock something in Sandra Calloway that had been withheld by mistake. That daughter did disappear that day. But not in the way my mother meant. She disappeared because I finally stopped abandoning myself on someone else's altar. And that is why the ending of this story hits me harder now than it did then. Not because my mother was exposed. Not because the town found out. Not even because the dead came back to life in the middle of Maple Street. It hits harder because my father called me the next Sunday. Because he said my work mattered. Because he made 2 cups of coffee and no one interrupted us. Because my aunt crossed an ocean to say I was never the one people left. Because my sister finally said enough. Because a bent photograph came back out of the trash. Because the version of me that kept asking to be chosen finally chose herself. If you have ever felt like a guest in your own family, then I need you to hear this part clearly. You are not always unwanted. Sometimes you are being managed. Sometimes the silence around you was built. Sometimes the rejection was curated. Sometimes the story you were handed about yourself came from the one person most invested in keeping you uncertain. And when the truth finally comes, it may not look triumphant. It may look like a quiet Sunday phone call. It may look like sitting on a back porch with weak coffee and finishing a conversation years late. It may look like realizing your life is still yours even after someone spent years trying to edit you out of it. That is the whole story. And if any part of it felt familiar, then I want you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe, because this channel is for stories exactly like this. Stories about family truth, betrayal, survival, and the moment a person finally sees clearly. If this one stayed with you, then the next one will too. Second, hit like because that helps this story reach people who are still trapped inside the version of events someone else built for them. And third, I want you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what line hit you the hardest. Tell me if you were Moira what you would have done at that front door. Or tell me what happened in your own family when the truth finally walked back in. If you made it all the way to the end, then you did not just watch a story. You witnessed a life coming back. And if you are still in the middle of your own, then stay. There is more. I will see you in the next one.